Street panel today on Wednesday, April 15th, 2015 at 20 minutes to 9. A couple things. We have approval of minutes of the meeting of February 25th. Do I have any motion on that?
So moved.
Second.
Any comments?
I'll just note there was one capitalization error that was pointed out to me that has been changed.
Thank you, Stacy. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstained? All right. We also have the minutes of the meeting of March 11th. Now, admittedly, I guess they were a little late, but I think we got some comments back, and we should be all set. So we have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
And a second. Comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just subject to a couple of spelling errors that I'll give her.
Great, thank you. All set, Stacy.
Right. Excellent. And we'll figure out about these in order to finalize the minutes from this meeting. So we'll send it out in draft, as we always do. We'll get your comments, and then perhaps they can be finalized at the Board of
I think they
Selectmen.
can be done at the Board of Selectmen for the final.
So just make sure you all get me your comments on the draft once we get it out to you, and we'll make the changes and send out a report. Okay. Welcome, everyone. So today's agenda, we'll talk a little bit about outreach and public education efforts that have been going on and that will be going on. We have updates on the Aquaculture Forum, on funding and financial activities, just update on what's happening there, and on warrant articles. And then we'll have some opportunity to discuss the work plan for 2016 and particularly talk about public engagement. How do we make sure that all of your great work is carried forward as you expect it to be, and that engagement is appropriate going forward. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and probably we'll end early. So we'll have a chance to talk a little bit about what the summary of this process will look like and clarity on sort of products, informal as they may be, and public comment, of course, before we adjourn. Any questions about today's agenda? Anything I'm missing? Okay. So, ground rules, as always, be concise, be respectful, stay on task, and be constructive. Reviewing action items. So, most of our action items are outreach and public education oriented, so we'll get into those in a second as we get into talking about outreach. The consensus statement, which was the big action item coming out of the last meeting, making sure that I got the language right based on what people had suggested, and making some changes to the map so that it met everybody's concerns about clarity and not overstating where non-traditional technologies might be placed. So just one question that has come up about the consensus statement is about the date. So I tried to be clear that the approval date was March 11th of the concept, and that's when we had consensus. But then there was the date of when the text was refined and finalized. And then beyond that, it took another couple of days or weeks for all of the constituencies to meet with their boards or their constituents and formalize their approval. And so that's when it was sent out to you. So that's just to explain the lag times and any potential confusion over these. So once I sent it out to you, that was because I had finally gotten all the boards and the constituencies' approval officially to have their names on it. Any questions about the consensus statement and the process there and the dates and the map? Okay, So we have two large size maps of the final version that are laminated and on board here, and one of them, as we'll talk about, should be put at the library on an easel there, if we'd like. They've agreed to have us put the map there, along with handout information that people can take with them. And so I want to talk about what people would like that to consist of. Other outreach. So the Citizens Forum occurred on Monday night. David and Alan, do you guys want to give any synopsis or how it went or the turnout or any of the kinds of questions you got?
I'll just say words, and maybe Mike has some input on it, since I think he was a lion's share of the presentation. But the turnout was, I thought, pretty good. My guess is, I don't know, maybe 120, 130, something of that realm. And I thought that the questions were really very good. I think very factually based questions. I think what was good. I didn't perceive any contention, so to speak. I mean, it was just really interested. Let's get the facts. Let's understand the process. Let's understand the the consensus where we are, and particularly where we're going on the warrant articles. I thought it was all quite well directed, and I think it came off fairly well.
I think, to me, it was fascinating that the questions came from people we hadn't generally seen before on this subject. So that means we had a chance to get out to a larger group. And like David said, the questions were all really good. And I gave an answer, and somebody challenged my answer, and I corrected it, and we've made peace. So that's what I like.
Good.
No, I agree with what was just said. 100%. I was pleased at the level of understanding of the technical questions in some ways on hydrogeology and other issues. So it was very helpful and well received, I thought.
Great. So there's one more forum opportunity that's been set up. So Doug did a great job securing us a place. Did you see here? Oh, there you are. Do you want to say a little something about just the logistics?
Yep, we're set for the Council on Aging, the meeting room, same place that the first one was on. The panel will be the same as the first forum, David, Alan, and Mike. This is a little different in that the Citizens Forum sponsored the first forum. So the question is, who really is sponsoring this forum? My thinking is it would be better if it could represent all the stakeholders as owning this forum as we put forward our work, and not individual stakeholders, but the whole panel. It's an orphan right now in terms of sponsorship. So we need to settle that by consensus if the group agrees with that. And then the second would be, who would the moderator be, since I don't think it would be wise to pick any one stakeholder group to have their person as moderator. So just getting ready for today, my thinking was our other selectman that's sitting at the table, Sims, might be the moderator, since he is not on the panel, but he is part of this advisory group. So those are what I'm suggesting, that we own it, so when it goes in the paper, we'd all be listed, and if it's agreeable to Sims, that he would be the moderator representing this group.
And it's set for May 4th.
At Orleans Council on Aging from 7 to 8:30.
May 30th.
I have no objection. I'm not certain I'm the best choice, but thank you for the suggestion. If someone else steps forward or another organization steps forward, I'd be glad to relinquish the responsibility.
You're the most neutral right now, I think.
You're also a good moderator.
Thank you.
So does everybody think that it'll be sponsored by the OWQAP as your you all are putting this out as...
I think that's where this comes from.
Yeah,
And
I
so
think so,
it's
too.
it's one form, and I think
Yeah.
that's entirely appropriate. That's what it is.
Yeah.
With the Sims, I mean, I love the guy. I don't know if there's any quorum issue now all of a sudden that we've got. I don't think so, but
I would be most comfortable if we get a determination on that.
The fact is, it's going to have to be, because if it's sponsored by this group, does that make it a public meeting?
Going to make it a public meeting anyways.
Right? So,
We post these meetings as a selectmen's meeting, we'd have to post that.
so we can probably do that too.
yeah.
Yep.
There's an alternate for moderator. I don't remember the name. Phil Marshall's wife was
Sandy.
Sandy. Did that professionally.
Yep.
So, I mean, there's someone who could stand in, and I don't think she has any affiliation with, or no strong affiliation that I know of with any one of the groups. I don't know if that works, if that suits you. As far as
That's got
OWA,
to be a good consensus on.
as far as OWA is concerned, I think it's great to join in and all get together on this.
If we're going to make this an absolutely impartial moderator, I think someone outside the process would be a preferable choice. I think I could manage it, but if there's someone else willing to step in, I think the public perception is very important.
Do we land?
If the group is agreeing on that, I know Sandy quite well. She's out of the Alban Institute and Washington. Conflict Management Resolution is her field.
Yep, she's good.
So she would be probably a very good moderator. I will ask her if that's okay with the
I
group.
think it's a good idea, Doug.
Thank you.
Okay, terrific. Okay, so newspapers, the Cape Cod Times ran, I had sent around a outreach version of the consensus statement, got approval from all of the primary members that the language seemed okay. We sent that to the Cape Cod Times, and that printed last week. The Cape Codder is printing a similar piece that should go to press this week. So I think they said Friday. So there's a little space between them, so that's kind of nice, and in case the readership is somewhat different, you have a broader reach. And I've heard some good feedback. Has anyone else heard any feedback on the Cape Cod Times piece?
It read well.
Exactly.
So the other question was about an informational flyer. So I do not have, I wanted to have a draft for you all today. I didn't quite manage that. But what we had in mind was something a little bit more graphically oriented, laid out. That wasn't just a page of bullet points, but that was going to be a little bit more compelling visually. Any thoughts you guys have about, maybe based on some of the feedback you've been hearing, questions people might have about what you think about the content of a flyer?
Visual impact's important.
Okay.
There is still a component of the public that is going to be sort of at the 101 or 102 stage, so we need to make sure that it's appealing to people that are starting up the learning curve as well as those that have spent some time on it. And I see visuals as the way to cross that bridge.
Yeah.
And I think keeping it at the general level, like your write-ups in the Cape Cod Times and so forth, I think at that altitude is probably, or what I would think might hit the best.
Okay.
And I would include no financial information.
And there hasn't been.
There isn't any meaningful
There's not much to give.
stuff that you can
Yeah.
put, sort of.
Maybe a bullet point format, but a little bit more than just a couple of words, rather than text.
Yeah. So, and to do it maybe like, key components, right? And then outcomes expected, and, so do it a little bit more heading with, you know, not just all one column, right, but make it a little bit more interesting, yeah.
Stacy, I think also you might include or conclude with a list of action items at town meeting and at the polls, because we have Article 5 of the annual, and Article 8 of the special. We have Article 54 of the annual, which deals with intermunicipal agreements and waiving our provisions so we can get grants if they can become available. And finally, we have a question, and none of this happens unless the voters vote the question under Article 8 and the question under Article 5 at the polls on the 19th. And in a community like this, you end up focusing on town meeting, and town meeting ends on a Monday, and the polls are 8 days later on Tuesday, and it's very difficult to get the results of town meeting into the hands of voters so that they know, my gosh, we've got to vote this on a question to authorize a debt exclusion or something like that.
Okay.
So you can't promote it, but you've got to at least alert people that these are the steps to proceed.
Great. Because I was going to ask very much that question of, can we name it, not promoting it, but saying, here's the ways to act on what's happened. Can you send me the detail, Alan, just the article numbers and the voting versus the polls versus the town meeting, so I can make sure that's clear?
Is this going to be the same piece of paper that will be handed out at the library?
Well, that was going to be my next question.
Okay. I was going to say, it sounded like two.
So if we get this flyer right, and this is what goes out to,
Then this should be the
as a
one.
mailing list, do you think it's also the right thing to have as copies at the library, sitting next to the map, so people will be able to use that as their more information?
I would say so.
Have you considered using social media to try to reach the younger demographic that are still voters and might bring them out also?
What social media channels are the right ones?
I'm not well-versed in it, but, you know, YouTube or Facebook or something where someone can go and see this informational brochure. A lot of people, they live and breathe by social media, and it's a way to
Unfortunately, I don't think the town has, we're
think
not
you
really
have a
into the
Twitter
social,
account?
we have website, but we don't really get into the social media. We haven't integrated that.
Even something that would direct someone to the website, although that's pretty cumbersome, getting through the website.
We had it. Directly to Orleans Chamber.
Yeah. Thank you, yeah, that's great.
And constituent organizations may have outlets?
Yeah, so I guess I think that's right. We turn this back to you, right? Once we have this, then it goes back to all of your networks, right? Sims, we would ask you to get it to the chamber and ask them to tweet it out or Facebook it out or whatever social media channels you all have access to get it out through. I think that's the way to do it. Ginny?
Thank you. If there's room for it, I would say putting the icons in for the non-traditionals with a short explanation, because that's planting the seeds for every time we use the icon on any map going forward. So starting with that understanding of what is a PRB, because we toss those words around here, but not necessarily everyone understands them.
So what do people think on the flyer, actually providing a little information about the non-traditional? These are the ones we're going to draw on, and just use those icons because those will introduce it and it'll also make it graphically interesting.
And can we get a copy of those icons so we can use them in our publications?
Yeah, great idea. Great idea.
It just I think that's important. I think that's a great idea. Get people used to the icons.
Yeah.
Not necessarily on the map, but as we're talking about it, let's get them used to the icons.
Well, and really, the point of this exercise has been to get away from plants and pipes.
Yes.
And so, unless we do that, we haven't clearly demonstrated that we've accomplished that objective.
Right. Great, that's great. Great suggestion.
Remember, a piece of paper has two sides, and there's no reason you couldn't use the back side.
Yeah.
Flyer.
So in terms of sending flyers, just, this gets pretty nitty-gritty, but, I mean, does the town sort of have that you want it on a trifold where you put the address on the thing, or would you put them in envelopes? How would you guys send?
But we've never really done that very much from a town vantage point. Anything that's gone out has been maybe part of our lovely real estate tax bills or our water bills that we'll stuff into envelopes. So this is something that would be different, that we'd have to just talk with the town administrator about. And obviously, we have to, I hate to get technical, but confirm all the stuff with Mike Ford that this is appropriate material and all that kind of stuff. So we'd have to, unless my colleagues have some thoughts, but we would just have to talk about
Just a background for Stacy, we have had discussions with regard to other subjects about municipal funds being expended in support of a specific perspective relative to a town meeting article. And I think that what David's referring to is that we'd have to examine this to make sure that we're on the right side of that line.
Exactly. And you know, the outreach pieces, the newspaper pieces were all run past
Mr. Ford.
Mr. Ford, and I would expect the same, and I would be drafting it with exactly that in mind. This is informational. This is what the group has come up with, and this is how you can act, right? But not advocating a point of view or a position. So yeah, and we would expect that whatever we do is going to get run past Mr.
Right,
Ford.
not only the written content, but the process of dissemination.
Yeah, yeah.
Stacy, just assuming that, like, the map is at the library and those flyers are gobbled up quickly, would you consider putting a label at the bottom of the map that would refer them to the landing page on the town's website for anything having to do with the water quality?
That should be on here.
Yeah,
Just thinking
we
that-
should, we can add that, just,
Right, it's just slap a label on it.
What about that, oh, I'm going to show my age now, the little square thing with the squiggles that a smartphone, where they...
Right, you just scan it
They
and-
scan it, and then it comes up on their smartphone.
Oh, yeah, QR code.
QR code, thank you
QR
very much.
Archie was so old.
yeah, we can look into that.
Phone at it.
That's being used more and more, so...
Yeah, yeah.
Quick read.
In response to the question about whether to send it as a flyer or in an envelope, it's cheaper for the postage to have it as a flyer because it can go bulk rate.
Yeah, that's what I was, that's part of what, and in that case, does it matter if it's tri-fold or if it's folded in half?
No.
For postage wise, no.
It just has to follow the postal regulations, which is 3 stickers on it, and they can tell you, a lot of people can tell you around town.
Okay,
Because we send stuff out all the time.
okay, okay. All right, so, because with that in mind, then, we can use at least half of the other side, right? And then...
Which is why you would want a tri-fold, because you get to print more.
Right, exactly.
Because you can't print where the address goes.
Right, so the tri-fold, then we can use
gives you
two-thirds
more
of the other
paper to
side,
text,
and the address just on one. So we'll play with that.
Mm-hmm.
And so the plan will be then for us to come up with some draft stuff to send around to you, get your input on format, on design, and on content. And once we have buy-in from you guys to then take it to Mr. Ford before anything would go out. And then it would be the town administration that would get it out to everybody.
We'd talk about the process of dissemination, right?
Yeah.
What we can do.
Yeah, and we'll act expeditiously to get stuff out to you guys, so this can all happen in a timely way. Okay, other outreach. Griffin, do you want to report on the radio and the other TV options, what we've learned?
Sure, so I'll just give a brief update. So I talked to Teresa Martin, who's the head of the local TV station, and she would be happy to run a sort of segment on the process so far. The panel would have to generate the content themselves for it to be aired on the TV. So either some sort of content would be submitted to the TV station, or they also have a production room, so they'd be happy to have it filmed there. But the staff to film it, do the editing, would have to be supplied by the panel. Or there's also a local volunteer class that we could work with who was working on video editing who could maybe be brought in for that day. Teresa was particularly interested in some sort of moderated panel discussion. She said those normally work well and get more audience interest, so she discussed that. So that's what we talked about with her. So, but again, the panel would really have to do with the content generation. For the radio, it's kind of a similar approach that the panel would have to send in something and really submit the content, but the radio station would be willing to submit that content. And for WCAI, it's still just 400 characters, but for the other local stations, we could do something more in depth.
So what that would mean is we'd have to generate something.
The Citizens Forum did tape theirs, so I'm sure that'll be on 18 and on 99.
Okay.
Usually they do, that's what they do. The one you're doing, we can do it. The next one coming up, we could tape that.
Right? Yeah.
That's too long for
Actually, they can go any length you want.
it's an hour and a half meeting.
Yeah. Well, that's what the Citizens
That's what the
Forums are,
editing-
and they're always on.
But I think, Jim, so you're suggesting you'd like to see some shorter thing
No,
being
we
aired?
talked about 10 minutes or something.
Or you can do both.
Oh, you can do both. They're looking for that sort of a thing, too.
Yeah.
Even 1 minute, anything. They have time to fill. I'm sorry, but they do. On the schedule.
We did one recently there, filmed there, with Paul and then people representing the Outer Cape towns, talking about the 208 process. And I thought it went very well. They supplied their class, the professionals, but also their class of filmographers, I don't know what you call them, cinematographers. And it was an hour and 2 half-hour segments, but it could be shorter. It didn't need to be an hour. It worked very well. They're very amenable.
So the question is, how does the desire for more of this, is there a need to have additional television or radio coverage? And if there is, do we have volunteers or sufficient buy-in from the panel as a whole that that work needs to get done, that there needs to be someone who can generate that or create it?
For the sake of discussion, I'll ask the question, is the effort to go through that production exercise necessary, or is a series of PSAs referencing broadcast times on 18 and 99 as effective?
Interesting.
I would tend to back Sims on that. It's unclear in my mind whether the additional benefit that we get out of the additional work on this other new stuff would gain us any more than what something like you have to say,
I'm just wondering
Sims.
if we'd be reaching a different audience with that effort, or if we put PSAs on the radio stations, are we reaching a new audience and then referencing them to existing material?
And so just to play that out, Sims, it would be interested in, wastewater in Orleans, here's some places to learn more.
Yeah, certainly advertise the May 4th event, is that correct, Doug? The date? It certainly as an advertisement for that, and then include reference times for other rebroadcast of other forums.
Yeah. What do people think of that?
Good idea.
We could even direct them to the library
Yes.
to see the map and,
Get the link.
or to the website.
A lot of times the radio stations will reference event websites on their website. I don't know how long they keep them up, but it's another thing to ask.
And those of us who have websites can do that, too.
Yeah.
This is a significant departure from what other towns out here have done. So, maybe rather than saying, are you interested in it, approach it from the point of view that, Orleans has taken, learn about what Orleans has done to take a different approach and to make this, and emphasize towards making this more affordable for communities.
Which I think is why the commission supports this process, so other communities may emulate. Get that right, Patty?
You did. We're available to, I've already drafted actually a short, couple paragraphs confirming the consistency of this process with 208, which we'd be happy to provide.
Great.
Headline the newsletter?
You could do that. It's a good idea.
Great.
Because you're always looking for content, right?
We are. We are also looking for that.
Space to fill. Wonderful. Anything else on outreach? I know that a lot of each constituency organization has been sending out information to your groups and your constituents, and that's been terrific. So, anything else on outreach? Yeah, Sims.
Yeah, the Orleans Chamber is postponed a couple of times for obvious reasons and conflicts, but we're planning on doing our final wrap-up on May 7th.
Okay, good. And a map is available for you to use, so we do have we have these two big ones that are on Phone Core. We have a couple of other big, same size, but just non-mounted. So if people are going to be doing forums or presenting to their groups, or have a display space that people come and let us know, and we'll raffle these off.
We're also going to do a call campaign we selected probably about the 80 most sensitive businesses in downtown area. We're going to make personal calls to the owners to encourage them to come to the meeting and be sure they know what's going on.
How many of those are local, Sid? How many of those would be voters?
I don't know off the top of my head. I'd say about half, probably at least. But I mean, we're not going to, obviously the ones that are off Cape, corporations and that sort of thing, those are already linked into systems in themselves, are not the ones that we're primarily targeting to make sure they come as the ones that are going to be affected the most.
But maybe, Sid, those businesses also could make information available to the people who work there, who probably are there.
Oh, absolutely. Wait for that flyer.
Exactly. Excellent. Anything else on outreach? Okay.
C is going to be here at 9:15, she said.
Okay. So why don't we skip the aquaculture forum for now and we'll come back to that one?
Okay, that'll be fine.
Do you want to talk about funding and financing?
Sure.
Updates?
Good morning, everybody. A few things on financing and funding. We haven't done any more work on the financial model since our last stakeholder workshop. We have a plan, and there was a handout or a one-pager in the description, and it's sent out with the board package on financial tasks. And I'll just speak from that. The work plan for the financial next year is critical, as we all know. In fact, if you reflect on the last year, you reflect on the last 10 years, this is probably the biggest issue is financial. I mean, that's what's driving this. If wastewater management were inexpensive, we wouldn't have had the need for this type of engagement. It would have been much simpler. But financial is an issue. As the program stands right now, and as it stood in the CWMP, it can be argued that it is unaffordable. Clearly, the CWMP had very simple financial analysis, which really wasn't as basically a simplified average cost of $2,550 per customer. To put that in perspective, EPA's criteria for affordability is 2% of median household income, which would convert to about $1,200 per year per customer. That 2% is what they call high burden, or that's the threshold at which the program is unaffordable. So coming into this, Orleans is basically twice the limit of affordability. And that limit of high burden is excessive to begin with. That's average over town. That doesn't take into account families with limited income, lower income classes, retired people, etc. So that's where we started. I want to say a word about the spreadsheet that was we talked about I think 2 meetings ago, and probably referred to last meeting as well, which had the user rate cases. The purpose of that spreadsheet wasn't to say, here's what the cost is going to be. It was essentially, and you probably don't have it in front of you, but I'll just explain. It had several cases, if you recall, across the top, and each case had a variable that kicked in. And the purpose of this spreadsheet was basically to say, we don't know what the actual rate's going to be, but it could range from anywhere from, say, given the plan as it stands right now, $1,800 per customer on the average over the whole town. Considering the whole project built out, it would be phased up to that. That's not going to kick in at year 1. It would be phased up over the whole town, all user categories, without any consideration of affordability for lower income brackets or whatever. So that's the high. If we did certain things like zero interest, it comes down. If we did then 30-year financing, it comes down further. If we input septage revenue, it comes down further. And if we go to 25% grant, it comes down further. If we can go to higher than 25% grant, it comes down even further. The purpose of that spreadsheet was to show the sensitivity to those variables so that over the next year, we can focus on defining those variables. The warrant article on the downtown planning is one of those that really highlights the need for the zero interest loan and what we have to do to get it. The septage revenue is another. So over the next year, the work plan really is to focus on those and to engineer this program down to where it's affordable. There's initiatives going on at 2 levels, really. You might say the short-term grant level for individual project planning and design. And then the second level is sort of long-term strategic discussions at the state level for substantial capital funding that was recognized by the Commission several years ago as requirement for the Cape to implement wastewater management in towns like Orleans. So there's 2 levels. One is sort of the micro level, and one's the macro level. Any questions about that? Or I just want to be sure that table was clear and that it's not misinterpreted. It provides a challenge, reflection on the challenges we have to get this to be affordable.
Just one question. My memory is that was all predicated on a 20-year.
Yes, one of the cases is a 30-year, though, if we spread it over 30 years. That makes a substantial difference.
But Mike, you're not now or have not worked further on this spreadsheet from last time?
The next step, and that's a good point, the next step that, as I mentioned at the time, is not included in there. There was a line item on special assessments, which is the value-based special assessments that need to be input based on the downtown planning that's going to be done under this program, plus the planning warrant article for next year. That allows us to look at the businesses, look at the potential for build-out under current zoning, what the value of wastewater is to those, and set those special assessments according to that value. So that, and that's a big factor here that's also not included in that spreadsheet. It's not, doesn't change the average because the average stays the same. But what it does is it changes the allocation of that cost to assign it to those that get the best and highest benefit from the program.
There had been another point, at least one other point raised about this too, where the question, we had the discussion that was going to assume septage revenue,
Yes.
and not all of these columns included septage revenue.
right.
So here again, more work to fix
Absolutely.
the spreadsheet. Okay.
That's right. This was meant to show that if you're at this point, say, if you look at case 4, 985, and you add septage revenue, it goes from, it decreases the cost. It goes from a 43% reduction of the max to a 51% reduction of the max. So you get another 8% reduction in the average if you can get that septage revenue. What the actual final case will be a combination of all these things. Septage revenue, the way this plan stands right now, will be in all the cases. Hopefully zero interest will be in all the cases. So we're moving from the 1,800 down toward the other end, which is in the 600 range per household. And then when we start allocating that cost, and including special assessments and other knobs on the radio, we can then start to say, and there's been some other ideas put forward for how to finance this. As we look at those, we're hopeful to get those down to where it's around the 1% instead of 2% high burden affordability. We're down around the 1% or something like that with the program.
And there had been some other questions as well about the choice of certain percentages, for example, the 20 to 80% betterment and so on. And
Yeah.
I'm assuming that this group won't ever see this again because after today, this group doesn't convene again. So does this then go to Mr. Larson and his colleagues on the Finance Committee, or who then will see this and work with this and understand the workings of this?
Well, we'll have a financial consultant, and it will basically go through the selectmen, and then from the selectmen out to the town departments as appropriate, and the committees as appropriate. I don't know if, I wouldn't say that this group will never see this again. I would anticipate that, and we're going to talk more about this later with regard to ongoing stakeholder engagement, but I would anticipate that summaries of how successful we're being in each one of these variables will be the information that goes out to this group, and there will be a understanding of where we are with the overall program and how successful we're being in lowering that cost.
Because that had been one of the questions at the Citizens Forum on Monday night. One of the gentlemen had asked, what is the financial, what's the impact to me as a taxpayer?
That's right.
And Alan declined to respond, or artfully declined to respond, very cautiously, carefully.
I would say logically.
The gentleman was satisfied. It was brilliant.
Yeah. Well, I think that was a correct response. We don't know. This sheet,
Understood.
this sheet only, it's like the volume control on your radio. You turn it all the way down, you can tell how low it can go, or the bass maybe. You can see how low it can go. You turn it all the way up, the treble all the way up, you see how high it can go.
Right.
Where are we? We don't know. But we do know now, at least we're starting to get a feel for the sensitivity of the cost to these variables and which ones need to be prioritized. They all need to be prioritized, frankly, to be honest. Jeff.
Yeah, this is not a criticism of your spreadsheet. I understand exactly where you were going with this, but visually, and the equity issue, one of the pieces that's left out of that is that our groups who are going to stay on septic systems, who are going to be pumped, who are going to have costs associated with that, and that from an overall equity from different classes of people needs to be, that cost needs to be reflected in it too, so you don't compare this project and leave out that bit, because
That's
it's all part of
exactly
it.
right. That's exactly right. There's a variety of variables here, not all reflected here. Another variable not reflected is the value of clean estuaries, productive estuaries, productive habitat to the whole town, independent of whether you're on septic or cluster system or a plant or whatever. That's a value that has to be recognized as well.
Mike, twice as you've been speaking to us this morning, you've referred to this as a sensitivity analysis, and I'd call it a pretty coarse one, or highly preliminary. And for future versions of this table, I'd like to see those words on the page. I think it would give the reader a better sense of what the document really is.
Yeah.
Mike, we're referring to these as emerging technologies. If we look at this as technologies, if we're successful with the demo projects, we should be, particularly with PRBs and flooded vegetative wetlands, those technologies should be emerging, and particularly if other towns take those up. So what I think would be very useful, and maybe it's a year or more away, we should be gaining experience, and we should see the cost of those technologies, and more importantly, the operational cost of those technologies to drop over time. Hopefully we'll create, if flooded vegetative wetlands are successful, it's going to be, demo projects are typically very expensive because you're trying to get it to work. We should then be planning at the end of the demo project some level of projection as if these are scalable, what happens to our long-term costs, and that should factor into it.
That's exactly right. The costs, as they're built up right now, aren't based on just the demos. They're based on the demos working. So, but they're also based on current costs, current
Correct.
capital and O&M cost of a full-scale project. That, as was mentioned in the Citizens Forum the other day, will decline as that technology gets more standard, and the monitoring costs are a big part of that.
Right.
That will hopefully decline over time as they're proven. So that's right. Any other comments on that?
So we will come back to this question just in terms of engagement and how we make sure that there's comfort among all who have contributed to this path, that the financial planning continues on in a way that's consistent with any concerns that you might have, right? We named a lot of values about equity, about affordability, and we want to make sure that those get carried through over time. So, and at least that the communication between the ongoing work on this process gets communicated effectively to all of the engaged stakeholders and to the public as a whole. So
Yeah, and
we'll talk about that. We'll circle back to that.
Right. Just to move on, I want to talk more about the short-term funding opportunities. But if you look at the financial task one-page handout, we talked a little bit about numbers 1 and 2, but number 3 I think is important. We have a meeting with the state revolving fund, Water Pollution Abatement Trust, coming up on the 21st to define specifically the requirements and limitations of the zero-interest loan framework and how they manage that, because we have to be first in line, we have to be prepared, we have to have all our T's crossed and I's dotted as we go into that program. So that meeting is coming up, and we'll have a specific work plan for how to do that. We also, a key factor is the second bullet, prepare and submit information required to enter the state SRF program. The town to date hasn't used the SRF, the State Revolving Fund. It's there, and this September, a project evaluation form will be submitted on the part of the town that gets us into the town into the SRF program, and therefore eligible for the zero interest. That's another one of those criteria. And also pursuing state and federal programs and options for debt forgiveness. There's discussions at a high level going on with the Commission, with the Cape Cod Water Protection Collaborative, and through the legislative delegation from the Cape on that as well. So that's the longer-term financial. On the shorter-term financial, there's a second page that was in the package, short-term funding opportunities, and I listed 6. There's others here, but these are the 6 primary ones. Just going through them quickly, there's actually a call tomorrow, a conference call on the requirements for EPA's Healthy Communities program coming through the Southeast New England Coastal Watershed Restoration Program. That can range in grants from $20,000 to $200,000. And we're need to submit an application by that relatively shortly to get into that program. Most of these are competitive and there's limited funding. DEP 604B, Water Quality Management, the town submitted an application in cooperation with SMAST about a week ago for $48,000 to do a ponds management plan. So it helps us take the monitoring data from the ponds, supplement it if necessary, and then do a formal pond management plan with that money. So that would be kind of kickstart that. We have the $1 million budget in the warrant articles, but and it includes a monitoring component which will look at the ponds, but this could help us actually put something together that would spur implementation on those ponds that need help, prioritizing them.
Mike, you're talking about freshwater ponds?
Yes, yeah.
Great, thank you.
I'm sorry, freshwater ponds, yeah. EPA 319, point source. That program is in place. It's been in place for a long time. It's for prevention, control, remediation of non-point sources. There's a 40% non-federal match required, which the town can meet with the program that it has. There's $1.4 million allocated for 2016. It's focused on what they call impaired waters. There's a number of impaired waters in Orleans that would be eligible for these funds. June 2nd is the date for application, and I'll be talking to Malcolm Harper about that in Worcester, who manages that program. What else here? 104B, I need to research that more. Cape Cod Water Protection Collaborative, the money hasn't been released yet, but there's a substantial amount of money being committed to monitoring. Yes, Sims?
As the Orleans representative to the collaborative, I've been made aware of an amendment to the county budget that's going to be proposed today to eliminate $200,000 from the collaborative's budget, which essentially would eliminate the monitoring efforts that the collaborative is trying to coordinate. So my understanding as a rep to the collaborative is that this will cripple the county's efforts to coordinate wide area water quality monitoring, and at the end of the day will cost the municipalities of the Cape collectively far more than the $200,000 that is proposed to be cut.
Absolutely, yeah.
So if anyone would like to get in touch with their assembly delegate between now and 4 p.m., there's some information to work with.
That's very interesting. I was in talking to Mr. Gottlieb a week and a half ago.
I got the email last night.
Okay. Okay. I'll have to follow up on that. That's significant because
Yeah.
that was the way that the work by the Provincetown Center and SMAST on support of the monitoring programs was going to be executed. So that was one of the big goals of the 208 planning effort, was to have that sort of clearinghouse and catalyst for that funding. On a positive note, the District Loan Technical Assistance DLTA grant the town applied for through the commission, and that's been approved. Mr. Kelly is preparing that to send back to the commission. You should be receiving that, Patty. Thank you for your help. It's $20,000 to help on regional parts of the work that are regionally oriented, so it would help with the coordination with Eastham and Brewster, especially related to the Tri-Town facility. CZM has a substantial, about $400,000 for FY15 for stormwater management projects. The grants generally have been nice size. They're about $125,000. There's only 5 communities that have gone after it, and Duxbury, Plymouth, Barnstable did a few years ago. But that's something that we need to be looking at. There's a 25% match there required as well. Mass Environmental Trust also has a program that comes through the state that I'm researching. But that kind of effort could put on the table, it's hard to say how competitive it is and how it's not funded flat every year. Sometimes there's more, sometimes there's less. But we could be talking about significant monies there for design and construction. When you're talking about the non-traditional technologies, that can be a significant percentage of a construction cost for a non-traditional technology. So, and that's the kind of thing that several of these programs are focusing on, is more innovative, emerging technologies. So that's the effort on the short-term funding issues. Any comments or questions on that? Sandy?
This is an overlapping issue. I was wanting to raise it in general, but I'll raise it specifically here. The seashore. How do we engage them in general, and then specifically, might there be some joint funding opportunities there? I know they're $40 million in a hole, but I mean, they're responsible for a good deal of this, as well as Eastham and Orleans.
I don't know how to answer that, Sandy. I haven't been involved with the seashore in any of the work we've been doing to date in the consulting side, so I don't know. I know they're key players in Nauset system, and I know that their coordination there is critical. It will happen. We're talking, as we look at the MEP work that needs to be done to either confirm or redo or whatever comes out of the analysis here. Part of it will involve bathymetry for the Nauset Inlet, and that will involve engaging with the seashore. So I see it coming, but I haven't been there yet.
Yeah, I followed up on that. That's Selectman been dealing with another issue. I discovered that Cape Cod National Seashore has an existing contract with Center for Coastal Studies. And last fall, Mark Borelli did side scanning sonar and did bathymetry of the entire inlet. So that's done. It'll be published later this year. They also, I believe, took benthic samples in 25 different locations and took either 3 to 5 samples in each one. So Sandy, you may be familiar with this as well, but it's all happening, and not a lot of communication with either Eastham or Orleans. And the interesting thing is that SMAST had done bathymetry in 2001 in the estuary. Got sonar all through all the channels. And now Mark Borelli has done it with Center for Coastal Studies, and we can see how much it's actually changed in the last 14 years.
Yeah, good, good. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the work groups on the monitoring side. That's a key part of it.
So that you're aware, in the past, the Cape Cod National Seashore has supported Orleans and Eastham and Brewster with freshwater pond monitoring. At the time, they did a lot of analyses for us at their lab in Truro, basically in exchange for chemicals. You know, we purchased the chemicals for them. I don't know what their availability or willingness would be to do something for us in the future, but when it comes to freshwater pond monitoring, they have a huge kettle pond monitoring program, and they might be a good resource.
Good, good. Thank you.
On the seashore, when the allocation of nitrogen responsibility happens, is there a nitrogen responsibility level that is allocated to the seashore?
That's a good question. I don't think so.
Yeah, sure.
So the towns control zoning of municipal lands within the seashore boundary. So I think to that extent, the towns do have control over contributions that happen to occur within the seashore boundary. Now, that said, the visitor center restroom, they understand is contributing, and that they need to work with us to reduce that contribution.
And in fact, I was talking informally with the Seashore rep to this group and to 208, Sophia Fox, and she said to me that she was a little puzzled as to why the Seashore had not been assigned a level of responsibility, which I thought was kind of an encouraging comment.
Okay, anything else? Good, thank you.
Great. Thank you. Sia, welcome. So you all had an updated draft Orleans Shellfish Forum. Sorry, I put the wrong title, non-updated title on our agenda, but the draft agenda has the updated title. Sia, do you want to
jump right in?
through it? Yeah.
Hi, everybody. I guess spring is here, and so is the traffic, which is why I'm a little later than I thought I was going to be. I'm used to flying down the 6, but not today. We sent out the Shellfish Forum draft agenda and received some very constructive feedback. So I've also reviewed this agenda with Kurt Felix and Anna Maria Frankic in Wellfleet, Rick York in Mashpee, a number of shellfish growers both in Town Cove and Pleasant Bay and Eastham and Wellfleet, having great conversations with some of the growers. Some very interesting themes are emerging from those meetings. And I want to sort of report out to you folks how the evolution of this forum is going. And so I'm going to go through the agenda. The first item on the agenda, so I'm just going to talk through the agenda and tell you what kinds of changes and thoughts we've had since this went out. The first part of the agenda is the introduction and the purpose of why are we doing this, kind of a statement. And one suggestion that came in is that we ought to write up maybe a page of the purpose, the goals, the objectives. What is this forum? Because it's not your typical workshop. So I'm going to do that and send it out as soon as possible. But it got me to thinking as I was starting to write is, why are we doing this? And so I wanted to just state for you folks what our thinking is on why we're actually having this forum. And I think the main reason is to take the first step in implementing the demonstrations and taking the expertise that comes from both the Cape and researchers from Roger Williams and others to bring to bear some specific knowledge from these experts that we have available on the shellfish component of the Orleans conceptual plan. So the main purpose is to bring together that expertise and to have also the regulatory framework. There are some expectations, there are some, issues, there are regulatory documents that have been written. And we want to make sure that we have all that before us in a very cogent and fair way as we move forward with the demonstrations. And we thought this kind of a forum would be a great way to bring that wisdom to very precision focus on what we're doing here in Orleans. And so that was the sort of big picture reason, but, and so with that big picture reason, the key is, so how do you do that? You know, it's great to talk about we want to have goals and objectives, we want to get feedback, we want expertise, and really the details of how you make that happen are the rest of this agenda. And we have to be very purposeful, and we have to be very focused, and we have to be very disciplined about taking lots of good ideas and insights and information and expertise and focus it in on answering really specific questions that we have that are very local and very site-specific. And so the first part of this presentation, after we go through our introduction, and I will be sending out, as I said, that document, the description, is to have Peter Orcutt, Kurt and Anna Maria, Rick York, Renee Gagne from Chatham, and Matt Weeks or somebody from Falmouth come in and talk about what they've done. And I'm hoping and I'm planning to be able to work with those presenters to help guide their presentations. I've heard Kurt and Anna Maria speak 4 or 5 times. I've heard Rick York speak 3 or 4 times. I've talked to Renee. And those presentations can go from the very, very general into the global. And what we really want for this workshop in this section, in this first section of the agenda, is the specific lessons learned. We're going to want to know, how many acres have you planted? What do you know about what you've planted in terms of population, in terms of site capacity, in terms of mortality? What have you specifically learned? And what have you specifically learned related to using shellfish for water quality and ecosystems restoration and ecosystems services increasing? So not just what have you done, but how do you know what you've done has had an impact, or do you know that? And so this whole first section is to get people to connect those dots for us in a very specific way. And I think from what I've been hearing from the regulatory community, those dots are really important to connect, to really understand, we put this many shellfish in, this many pounds, this many numbers, this many whatever. We measured these parameters, and this is what we found. And so that's what the first section of this workshop is going to be. Very, again, disciplined and focused.
One of the other dots might be variability of one specific site relative to local or adjacent sites.
Yes. And we're going to get to that, but I think that's a very good point. So after these talks where they talk about what they've done, I think I have here the regulatory perspective, and I was fortunate. I was invited to speak at the Massachusetts Shellfish Officers Association annual meeting, and this actually was a great couple of days of Division of Marine Fisheries bringing together all the shellfish propagation, the shellfish constables in every town on the Cape and Southeast Massachusetts. To talk about shellfish propagation and look at the demonstrations that are coming from Cape Cod as well as from the Nature Conservancy. So I was one of the speakers, and Catherine Ford and our own Brian Dudley were also speakers, and I thought their presentations were very, very useful. They spoke about what some of the regulatory expectations are, what some of the guidance documents are. Catherine Ford did a wonderful job talking about the broad range of goals and objectives that DMF has and how these demonstration projects and shellfish fit into their big regulatory picture. And it starts a dialogue going so that we can start to understand where they're coming from and how we can fit in and sort of educate about how what we're doing fits into more than maybe just the first level that they're looking at for shellfish. And so I have those presentations from Moshe, and I'm just going to make sure it's okay to send them out, and I think having whoever's interested see those in advance, as well as the regulations that I look at in Falmouth all the time, to help us understand what that regulatory, framework is in which we operate. And so that's why I have basically a half an hour for that in the forum. And after that, we're going to delve right into what's going on in Orleans. And at 11, the point of this overview is to get everybody who's at this forum on the same page about what we're doing in Orleans and what specific is of the coastal ponds and what's going on and what we're suggesting for Town Cove. And this is sort of one piece of what Mike and I have been envisioning as preparation for this forum with the expert panel and others who might be interested. And what I'm calling it is a pre-briefing. So what I've been putting together is a brief description of each of the shellfish recommendations for the sub-watersheds. I've got a table that shows the sub-watershed, Aries Pond, how many shellfish have we planned for, what's the nitrogen removal, and what kind of area requirements are we expecting. And so that table, along with the narrative description and our maps, is going to go out in advance to the expert panel and others who sign up and want to be part of it as kind of a reading assignment, if you will. And so that's a little bit of reading assignment. The other thing that I'm going to ask them for are their questions and observations and key issues and other feedback. So they're not only getting this pre-brief of what we're talking about, they're also going to be asked to come up with specific information and questions for us. Send that out probably by the end of the month, for sure by the end of the month. And then mid-May, I'm planning to have a conference call where I discuss with them what we've sent, get their feedback, remind them that they have a homework assignment that's going to be due as part of this forum, and kind of focus everybody in, again, to try to meet that goal of getting expertise specific to Orleans. So this 11 o'clock is a very brief presentation. They've already heard this. They should know at this point, they, the expert panel, they, the people who have pre-registered, exactly what we're doing in excruciating detail, have had time to think about it, have been reminded that they're supposed to think about it, and then this is just brief for everybody else who happens to show up that day. This is what the plan is. And then we get into the real meat. From 11:30 to lunch is a time where we're getting specific input from the expert panel, and again, who were asked to compile questions ahead of time, and then get comments from attendees, and then I will start to list and prioritize what's coming out of that, hopefully very high-level dialogue that's going on. And then we have lunch, and part of the purpose of lunch is to feed everybody, because there's a lot going on here, but the other is to give me a chance to try to synthesize themes and threads that have been coming out of the first part of this day and organize it so that when we get together in the afternoon, we can take what's hopefully come to a pretty specific level for Orleans and drill even deeper. To say, okay, so we've talked about salinity is important, and maybe you want to have 15 parts per thousand for these kind of shellfish and over 15 for these. What else? What else about salinity? Is there a salinity temperature correlation that we ought to be looking at? So I really want to make sure that we've taken a level of detail that we've gotten to right before lunch and taken it a step further and asked the questions of these experts that will pull out of them what else we need to know. And I think there's going to be a huge amount of resource in that room. And sometimes it's really important to hear what they have to say and be able to digest it for a little while, no pun intended, and then ask them again in a different way. And hopefully during that lunch period, there'll be a really constructive dialogue where experts are talking to each other about Town Cove and does it make sense to put mussels in there, for example, things that are starting to come up from my conversations with the shellfishers. And I think what we've got finally in terms of the expert panel is a balance of people who have expertise in other places, Wellfleet, Falmouth, Mashpee, and people who have spent decades on the water here in Orleans. When I talk to the shellfishers, it is incredibly valuable. They actually know where there's good bottom, where there's patches of this, that, or the other thing, how the tides move, where they've had success, why they've had failures. And so, maybe 5 or 6 shellfishers I've talked to have some really common themes that we want to make sure are brought to bear as we take that next step in implementing demonstration projects, which I'm extremely excited about. So that's the update on the forum. And what I wanted to ask is sort of a kickoff question. I get to ask you guys a question. Is as we're preparing this forum and doing the last bits of really honing down the agenda and the details, how does this want to interact with the Orleans Water Quality Advisory Panel? And so I was just throwing that out there because I'd like to know.
One other comment on that C and I have been talking about this multiple weeks now, I don't know, maybe months, but the list of folks she has here on the second page is a represents the folks she's been talking to, as she said, from either growers or regulators or actual shellfish wardens, whatever. There's not going to be all those people sitting around the table. This was intended to figure out who is doing exactly what we need, and this will be turned into a short list. So we'll probably have 6 or 8 or something like that people in the panel itself.
Right.
But then others there, like shellfish wardens or people in New Orleans that have been engaged in this, that, like the liaisons here, have had hands-on experience, but will bring in as necessary. So it's not going to be a panel of 35 people.
No, that's
Sure.
exactly right. I meant to say that the expert panel is, from the list, is probably going to be shorter than it is, probably the first 6 or 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The first 9 people are probably the list for the expert panel, and not all of them are going to be able to make it. I mean, frankly, stuff comes up, and people say they can come, and then something happens, and they don't. So hopefully we'll get the first 9, and then everybody else are just are invited resources, people who are resources to the process, but aren't necessarily that specific expert panel.
I think in terms of coming up with the core panel, that we ought to be vetting this for people who have knowledge and experience, expertise that we need.
Okay.
Rather than, just taking getting a bunch of people together. We really need to focus in on, why do we need this person here? What do they bring to the party? I like the idea of writing up the purpose of all this, because the paper that was sent out doesn't, Mike summarized it, I think at the last time this was discussed, as to how this was proceeding, and you have done also here. But that isn't reflected in here, and to make sure everybody's on the same page, we need to have something in writing about this is what we're going to do. Like the idea of having the presentation material sent out well in advance so that everyone gets a view on it and can kind of bone up on it before we go into it. The other thoughts on this were there's some of these A, B, C, D topic lists to the group of what we're going to discuss, and I understand that maybe just to frame the discussion for this group to see what kinds of things you're going to talk about. But I would rather see it as kind of the broad direction you want to go in with the discussion, and let the experts identify what the important issues are rather than we identify it for them and narrow the conversation. The last comment that I have is I'd very much like to see, and you've talked about conference and the marine fisheries and DEP identifying what the regulatory framework looks like. I think it's important that we get that written down, that expressed, so that everybody can see, not in terms of the Massachusetts general law, quote unquote, or the Code of Federal Regulations quote, but in the nuts and bolts of what they want to see in a demonstration project or the implementation of the technology.
Yeah, I think that's a great step. Part of it, and we're going to do all that. Interestingly, the A's and the B's and the 1s and the 2s actually have come from my discussions with experts. So they've fed back. These are the kinds of categories, suitable growing areas. What are the key environmental factors? What are the appropriate methods for growing for these areas? And I think maybe sort of a question is just to have another one, which is other key considerations, to give a recognition that we've got more than just the narrow focus.
Yeah, my concern is just not putting forth something that narrows the discussion from the get-go.
Yeah.
But leave it and make sure they understand that it's a broad discussion, and we're depending on their input.
Structured brainstorming is what I have in my
I
head.
understood,
It's hard to do.
I understood also that there was going to be some material going out about the situation here in Orleans, or facts on the water systems and that sort of thing, for them to look at, to give us feedback on. I assume that's part of the game plan also.
Yeah, sure.
And the other consideration is, would they, I mean, at least for the core group, at some point, they ought to get out on the water and perhaps with a couple of local fishermen and see it for themselves before they, so that they have some kind of, introduce them to the situation beyond what they get on pieces of paper. Kind of a field trip kind of thing.
Maybe. I'm looking at who, let's talk about the specific of honing and getting the right people for the job. If you guys look at the expert panel invitation list, and we don't have to complete this here, but we've got Anna Maria and Kurt from Wellfleet, Rick York from Mashpee, Peter Orcutt from the, sort of representing Orleans shellfish growers, and Sandy McFarlane, Renee Gagne from Chatham, who's doing really a tremendous job. I had a great opportunity to talk and meet with her. Henry from Eastham, Dale Levitt from Roger Williams, who's actually runs the Massachusetts Shellfish Growers Association. He's a real hands-on. He's a professor at Roger Williams, but in addition to that, he's been out there for 20 years or more, actually growing, working with growers, trying to solve the environmental problems that come up. You know, why aren't my oysters setting? You know, they call Dale to those kinds of things. So he's a real practitioner. And then Rick Carney, who's on Martha's Vineyard. And if you think about those as the expert panel, I would say that Peter and Sandy and Renee and Henry have certainly been out, know Orleans waters. I mean, they've been either in Town Cove or Pleasant Bay for decades. So I don't think a field trip for them is particularly relevant. And the thought was that Anna Maria and Kurt have their experience in Wellfleet, and by having over half the panel with a lot of field, Orleans-specific field experience, we would be able to talk to them about that, to sort of save, because it's a time issue. I mean, it's a big commitment to go out on a day-long field trip. And I will plan, for sure, to go out. I mean, I've been out in Pleasant Bay fairly extensively, and I was going to go out in Town Cove before this, so that I'll have that field experience. And I'm going out with the shellfish guys, and boy, you can get a huge amount of information from them. So I think if we, again, make sure that those who have water experience share that experience, then people like Kurt and Anne-Marie and Rick York will be able to take their field experience and build on it with the expertise that they have.
A couple of just quick additions to what Sia is saying. I think it's interesting that when the board voted the funding for what Sia is doing in this aquaculture initiative 6 months ago or something like that, we asked Anna Maria and a couple of other folks to come over. Anna Maria came over, was very engaging and interested in this. Actually, after the meeting, went out and toured, or before it, I forget which one, went out and toured all the sites where we showed her we're thinking about it. She's been out there. But the thing that reminded me of is one of the purposes of this kind of forum is that as these people come together, there's going to be 3 or 4 or 2 or 3 or 4 of them that really engage, that are really going to pick up the information, they're going to digest it, they're going to have a lot of questions, they're going to come to the forum, you're going to listen to the forum, and you're going to see, gee, that person knows what they're talking about, they know how it fits with Orleans, they communicate well, and that's the technical advisory folks we want to bring forward. We don't know quite who they are yet. We have good suspicion who they're going to be because of Anna Maria's involvement before. But from this will come a technical advisory group that we hope we can continue to lean on as we go through the process of the design of these projects. This is just the first step. This is to get us all on the same page, know what's being done other places, as Sia has said very well. So.
Chris, were you?
Yeah. The one thing, and someone just correct me if I'm wrong, and not only taking a step back, But I think this community, and really the Cape Cod community as a whole, we need to stay in tune with what's going on at the Shellfish Hatchery in Dennis at the end of Chapin Beach Road, because my understanding is they've provided 90+% of the seed stock, and have shown to be really successful here on the Cape. And I know there's been issues when other people have tried to propagate different shellfish and use them in different areas. And that facility is old. The 4 co-owners all have 120+ years of experience out there, and I know they're in discussions with the Nature Conservancy, the 2 different towns, Yarmouth and Dennis, and looking to be bought out. And if that facility doesn't exist, everything changes. And where the seed stock is coming from could change, how the success rate here in Orleans. So I don't know if any of these people have been involved. I don't recognize any of the names from their facilities, but we get a lot of people on the grounds here in Orleans, but we also have to remember where is the stock coming from.
Yeah, I'll speak to that. Dick Krause and I speak regularly.
Yeah, good.
He's an incredible worker, has done an incredible thing, really is almost the father of this, this whole idea of oyster propagation. I mean, he gets a lot of credit for bringing this, and a lot of the growers that I talk to speak very fondly and have high respect for the product that he makes. One of the things that we're talking about here is not just oysters. We are talking about quahogs and perhaps even blue mussels. And so part of this whole propagation, I mean, they're doing 9 million quahogs coming out of Chatham as the landing. That's a lot of quahogs. And she's getting a 2-year, 2.5, 3-year growing cycle. So quahogs need to be on the table. They're not as, economically attractive, but they're also a very stable crop that can grow in different conditions, and mussels as well. And the other thing is, so last year, so I grow 2 million oysters in Falmouth, and I've been doing it for 3 years. I grow a lot of oysters, so I'm very concerned about source. And last year, we couldn't, the spout wouldn't set, so I couldn't get the early set that I needed. And there are a number of other places where you can think about going. So it's not as if there's one source or you have nothing. We have a high preference for that one source, but you can also go other places, and that's what we had to do to actually get oysters last year, and they grew well. And they're not triploids. I mean, we're not growing the triploids. So I'm aware of that, and I believe that because that is such an important component, not just across Cape Cod, everybody wants to buy from ARC. There will be an ARC in some way, shape, or form. So I think that's really important.
I do have a specific and direct question, but before I'd ask it, I'd like to recognize that Jim McCauley, in a very low visibility spot, has had his hand in the air for a while.
Okay.
Thank you, Steve.
Those do.
Hopefully by the time we have the quorum, town meeting will have approved the warrant and town election will endorse the warrant. The major effort for next year in this area is to the demonstration projects. Tonight, hopefully will come out of this day with a very clear direction for the demonstration projects, what we want to do, and maybe this is pushing it, ideally some specific suggestions about what the most effective demonstration projects would be for next year, because you could jumpstart that entire effort with this step.
That's what we're trying to do.
Thank you.
So just to that end, just to clarify that, because I think we've heard it from a couple of people, is as you're writing up the goals and objectives, to think to make sure you're saying in there what the outcomes are in a pretty explicit way, right? We want to convene a technical advisory group and identify who's going to be on it. We want to prioritize demonstration project sites, or however it is whatever the expectation is of the actual outcome of this event.
Yeah.
Can I run a rough draft by you?
Just in terms of categories, not in terms of content.
Yep.
For me, yeah.
So, my question for Sia is, does experience over time with geomorphology have a place in this conversation?
What do you mean by geomorphology?
The changing tidal patterns and the changing inlets of both estuaries and its impact on this industry.
Right. Yes, the question is how. From one perspective, the growers who I've been talking to have absolutely talked about how their grants used to be and how their grants are now. So you've got sort of that empirical data. I mean, they haven't quantified, they haven't really sat there and said, okay, so how different is it? How much is the water clarity? How much more fouling? How much more this? But they've definitely experienced changes, and whether those are causally linked to the changing inlet, it's hard to decide. So you'll get some experience from the growers on what's been happening with the changes. Are you talking more specifically about having SMAST or whoever? It's a really complicated...
If there is an impact, I'm going to assume that it's some sort of sine wave that is attached to volume of exchange. And that is going to have both clarity and temperature impacts, I'm guessing, in certain parts of the estuary.
Salinity.
Salinity. And we are trying to get to the effectiveness, the viability of this as a remediation methodology. And it would, again, get to my earlier point of variability.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe it's a relatively flat line, but maybe it's fairly up and down, and maybe it depends on where in each estuary you are.
And year in, year out, the guys that are harvesting wild or growing are getting about the same take. It's just what they have to do differently to manage how their system is. So
it seems to be a question that should be touched on if we're going to be thorough.
Why don't we add that to the...
Jeff, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah. There's a reasonable possibility that shellfish and other ecosystem processes that existed before we came here did a good job of regulating the waters, the water quality. And one reasonable example of this is Pleasant Bay, which, if you know, the inlet configuration has changed around different ways, and back in the 1980s it came in from Nantucket Sound. So that by the time the tide was going out at the entry, it hadn't gone high at Meeting House Pond because it didn't reach up there. And if you read the MEP report, it uses the model to go back and look at what the system looked like at that point. And it says that nitrogen levels were 40 to 60% higher in that system in around the early 1980s than they were around 2000. Okay? And so far, I haven't heard a lot of people anecdotally saying that, that Pleasant Bay was a real mess in the early 1980s. In fact, in 1983, there was a huge harvest of scallops. So, it brings up the question as to how, is MEP right? Were the levels that high, or were there something else going on in the system? We don't.
So, I would just say that the scallops were probably loving that nitrogen. But more, my original question really was, with this panel and these programs, is there a lot of experience in monitoring and measuring nitrogen removal as well as growing the critters? Because I see two pieces to this. The one, and I think we all agree, we got to get the critters to produce, reproduce, thrive, and live and survive. But the other piece then is that question of how are we ongoing going to measure what the success of this is and just how much nitrogen is being reduced. So I'm I'm not saying that they don't have experience, that they shouldn't participate. Both sides are very important, but I'm wondering of this group, do any of them have real solid experience in measuring nitrogen removal?
Yes, absolutely. And I'll tell you who. Diane and Josh at the Cooperative Extension have been doing an extensive amount of work in actually measuring the nitrogen content in the shell and the soft tissue for oysters and cohogs. And Josh has done sort of an ongoing, we've gotten to the point where we know if you've got a pound of wet oysters, how much nitrogen is in them, which is the really practical way of doing it. Nobody's going to count oysters but me. And I do. I count oysters all day long in Falmouth. But the right way to do it is to just get a bushel, weigh it.
At night, you count oysters, not sheep.
Blue mussels later.
Jumping over those fences.
So Anna Maria has been doing some work with the Center for Coastal Studies in Wellfleet to try to get at theirs. So we've got SMAST here on the list, and we've got Center for Coastal Studies. And Brian and I have been doing a huge amount of monitoring in Falmouth. And in fact, the second-year oyster demo report just came out. I just presented it to Conservation Commission. So I have 2 years of, three and a half years actually, designing the experiment, doing a viability study for the first year, and then 2 years of actually implementing both in water as well as meat and tissue of the actual oysters, as well as denitrification. That's in the first year denitrification. And I'm working with WHOI right now and MBL to do some additional denitrification studies in a couple of our ponds. So I think we've got people who really have been looking at this.
Excellent, thank you.
As part of this. And in fact, that was also that was a comment that came from Pleasant Bay Alliance, Carol. When I showed her this and had talked through the agenda, she actually said just this nitrogen removal benefits really should be part of the lessons learned from these in the beginning. I think that's really important.
So we have 3 more people who've asked to comment. I just want to do a check-in that people feel like this is helpful, this is useful. We have the time to use it, so we're good? Okay.
Sia, you have 7 growers, Orleans growers, listed on your list, 6 plus Peter Orcutt, who's been in it longer than anybody else. I think we also need to try and find out why all the other growers have left. And 20 years ago, you couldn't get a grant in Pleasant Bay because the wild fishermen had come ashore and they saw the opportunity to make a living, and virtually all of them have abandoned their grants. And if we're talking about maybe 3 million oysters in Little Pleasant Bay today, maybe not even that. Yeah, I mean, Orcutt's got 1 million plus maybe, but, so anyways, and we know there are 40 million in Wellfleet, and we're trying to deal with nitrogen removal, and we're going to know that we're going to need X more oysters. We need to understand why people left that business, and how can we find others to come in and replace them to manage this. And that's the money side of this that really needs to be looked at.
Very relevant. And in fact, one of the potential demonstrations and one of the actual recommendations on the plan that we have is using the existing shellfish grants in Pleasant Bay and having a harvest of, I think it was 2 million oysters. So planting is one thing, but what you're actually landing is what we really care about because we want them at that nitrogen removing size. And so that is going to be a really important question of how do it's 27 acres worth of grant. How are we going to get that to produce this? And it's one of the first questions I ask the growers is, so you're producing this much, what could you do, why are you doing it, all that stuff. But I think why have they left is a really key question.
And if you look at Peter Orcutt, I can remember when Peter and his wife were the 2 people that managed the grants out there. And then his son came along, and I think his daughter, and now when they leave the landing in the morning or at the tide cycle, they've got 2 boats with maybe 8 or 9 people to manage it. So there is a business here that takes capital, and it takes payroll, and everything else that goes with it. And we need to understand that as we expand that, and particularly in Little Pleasant Bay. So.
Absolutely, thanks.
Judy and then
Sort of as a follow-up to Judith's question, you know, as I look at that first section where where the topic includes quantification of nitrogen removal. You just mentioned the work that SMAS is doing in Falmouth. I believe it's the only study like it on Cape Cod, and a report did just come out. So I'm curious why you don't have some scientists in this mix that can talk about the results that they're seeing at this point. You also mentioned Center for Coastal Studies is doing some monitoring in Wellfleet. So,
Well, Anna Maria is the scientist who is synthesizing. So SMAS does the data collection and analysis, but sort of for Falmouth, you know, Matt and I are the synthesizers, if you will, sort of like, what does this mean? So you get a bunch of data, you get a report, you get a bunch of tables. Somebody needs to take that the next step of, so what is this actually telling us? So Matt's going to do that for Falmouth, and Anna Maria is going to do that for Wellfleet. And so those are what I would call the science side of it. And Rick York is actually a scientist. He
I'm not familiar with that.
Yes, he actually, I believe he actually has a PhD. In fact, I'm sure he has a PhD in microbiology, and did research for a number of years. And he works with SMAS, but again, does his own analysis. So I think we've covered the actual science part of it with those representatives, and having Brian Howes and Amy or somebody from Center for Coastal as part of the invited resources will add more to that. But I do think it's very important, having given these presentations about the nitrogen removal, I know what you have to say, I know what you have to look at, and I'm really going to push these guys to show us their data in their presentations, and really be very specific about how many acres did you plant, how many oysters were in those acres, how much nitrogen did you remove, because those are the real those are the numbers we need to see. And, okay, you didn't do nitrogen. What about water clarity? Because to me, that's really important. And maybe you did dissolved organic nitrogen, which I really care about, and you can see that in the chlorophyll numbers. So we're going to have those, as much as exists in these data sets, we are going to try to present those.
SIA, there are two other organizations that might be considered resources because they've raised issues that relate to this. One is APCC, who has been studying and very concerned about what they consider may be the level of contamination of the shellfish that are grown and sold by the state or sent to the towns by the state. I can't remember how that goes.
The contaminated relays.
The contaminated relay. And then the other one is the Seashore, again, who, and I think this relates, are concerned about the potential for dredging, were that to happen, to release red tide spores that might not have come up otherwise.
Right. So I think that Jeff Eagles' point that we want to make sure that we have the expert panel for sure as the people who are going to give us what we need. Yep. And then the other resources are sort of the group of people that have other information that are the wider net. Right. Joanne Marmuto and I work pretty closely on some things, so they could be another invited resource, and the Seashore as well. I don't see why not.
I just say I think it's going to be a dynamite program, and I just make sure that you tape it so it can be broadcast on Channel 99 or whatever. It would be a shame to have this only be available to the handful that can be there. I think there'd be widespread interest in seeing this.
Yeah, how are we going to, is there a local TV that will come to the library?
I just have one, right? Yeah. If Sarah can't do it, there are people out there who do it.
Okay, who should
We've done it. Yep. Yes, Sarah's running the controls here.
I was pointing it out, and I didn't know he was a certain type. I'm ducking. He's not pointing at me.
So can I ask one more question about outcomes, which is there an expectation that this panel will have recommendations about the hybrid plan quantities, areas, nutrient level expectations, like things that would come out of this forum that would actually feed into a first revisit of those expectations in the more detailed hybrid plan? Or is that something that would come later?
I think that's going to come after demonstrations, myself. I mean, I feel like there's a finite knowledge base that we all look at, and that's where those numbers came from, and, people are more optimistic or less optimistic about mortality and this, that, and the other thing, but ultimately, the proof is going to be in the demonstrations, and so I believe that this is how we're going to do the best demonstrations we possibly can, and then from those demonstrations, maybe even after the first year, then do a revisit, which is what the adaptive management plan has in it as the process. So that's my thought right now.
I'm just thinking about the intersection with this group is when it gets to that stage, that's when you want to make sure that there's really good engagement around any...
Updating the CWMP. Exactly. Right. And this is before, I think the demonstrations are going to trigger that, and this is going to help the demonstrations get started. I mean, it would be great if we could actually, a year from now, be thinking about a shellfish demonstration, like actually implementing it. That may be very ambitious because you got to buy gear and do all this other stuff. But if we work really hard over the summer and the fall and the winter, it may be possible to do at least even a viability study for next summer. Because you have a window. You can grow in June, July, and August. That's when you're doing your demo. So we got to try to plan accordingly.
Anything else on shellfish food? So I think that was really helpful input. This is input, there's more potential room for input.
And how are we going to do that? That was a question that I did have that Mike and I were talking.
I mean, my sense is this group is not convening this. This group is giving their advice to you. You guys are convening this. So people who have additional advice, just talk to CI.
Yeah, I was going to say, if anybody wants to see drafts of things and be more sort of roll up your sleeves and work with me on it, you should just contact me directly.
And maybe you could sort of ask for a short list of people who want to be in your contact, as you get your sort of...
When I do the pre-briefing, as I'm sending materials, you can tell me...
How do we do that? You're going to send out something to pre-register?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, what was that question?
He was asking, am I going to send out something to pre-register? And I've been sending out the agenda, and people have been feeding back just by email, but I was going to send out sort of a formal. And should that go to the entire panel?
Let's invite I'd like to invite the panel and we'll send it to our mailing list. So
perfect.
Make sure everybody is aware of the opportunity.
We can also invite you.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
But we're in the crane room, so what do we got, 120 people?
125 people. That includes your presenters.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Great, guys. Let's take a break. Let's take 15 minutes, and we'll come back, talk about work plan, warrant article, and...
All yours, Stacy.
Great. I'm going to hand it over to Mike to talk about the warrant article ask update.
Okay, you all have seen the list of tasks under warrant article, is that number 8?
5. 5 of the annual town meeting.
5 is the
annual town meeting.
8 is the town center plan. 5 is the master, is the planning.
The wastewater master planning. Yeah. You've seen that. That basically hasn't changed. We have, I brought it on my computer, but it includes a list of tasks that we've talked through several times. I just wanted to give you an update on where we are with some of those tasks. There's a need, there's always a balance between going too fast and going too slow. And at this point here, we're trying to reach that balance. given that we have a month to town meeting to get this warrant article approved. At the same time, if we wait till then to start thinking about how to implement them, we may miss a monitoring season. We have some other key issues that we want to address during the summer, fall, before another winter sets in, like hydro-geo studies for potential disposal sites. So there's an urgency on some of the tasks that we're moving forward with. Sia has talked about the shellfish task, which is one of the demonstration projects. The forum will turn very quickly into the design requirements, siting requirements, monitoring requirements, regulatory requirements of the demonstration project. So that kickstarting that's one of the demonstration projects in the warrant article. Another that we're starting on is the Town Cove PRB. The impetus for that, not that it needed any impetus, because it's a project that we prioritized from the beginning. We believe we have a good location for it. It's got significant cost implications if it works with regard to saving capital money. And in addition, one of the side studies we've been doing is with regard to the landfill and the potential for increased nitrogen flux from the landfill. And if you looked at the board package and you've seen the data that has been reviewed, the hydro-geo work that's been done over the last couple of months on looking at the data at the monitoring wells that have been in operation since 1992 at the landfill, and especially the data from 2005 when the landfill was closed. And as you can see from that chart, there is a elevated nitrate concentration down gradient from the landfill complex. I say complex because it's not clear that it's the landfill. There's also abandoned, I shouldn't say abandoned, they were restored to some degree.
I'm going to say sorry.
The site was restored, but not to depth. It was surface restored of the old lagoons, septage lagoons. And in addition, there's a composting facility there that's been operating for approximately 10 years now, to my understanding, that could be a contributor of nitrogen to groundwater. So what was done was MT Environmental, who's actually worked on the PRB at Otis, the Shumet Pond PRB, and has been working on the Falmouth PRBs. Very capable fellow. Jim Begley has collected the data from the last 20 years of monitoring at the landfill, and looked at it, evaluated it, and produced the charts that are in the draft report that he submitted that does show that increased concentration down gradient. We don't know from which of those sources it comes yet. Jim is giving us a scope to do more additional test wells and sampling at the landfill to define the sources, the concentration of those sources, the potential longevity of those sources, and the migration patterns of those sources downstream. We don't know if that source hugs the surface as it goes generally north to northeastward toward Town Cove, or if it dips, and what implications that has on Town Cove nitrate flux. Also, there could be some attenuation in the distance between the landfill area and Town Cove. So that's what we're doing here relatively quickly to try to get the data that would be used to say, here's what a PRB would do for us, here's where it should be, here's the preliminary design for what it would look like, and basically other design criteria for that PRB. So that's the first step in that demonstration project. Any questions on that?
Does the scope of that include evaluation of other chemical constituents in that plume?
It does as it relates to nitrogen, like oxygen, dissolved oxygen, ammonia, other factors that pH that would influence nitrogen concentrations and nitrogen transitions from different phases of from nitrate to nitrite, nitrite to nitrate, etc., but not other contaminants at this point.
Well, what about the 1,4-dioxide?
Right now, that's not in the scope. There are studies, I understand, this is secondhand, but I've talked to Tom Daly, there's studies going on at the police station looking at probable more local sources there than the landfill at this point right now.
Mike, just, there was a study done in 1992 by Roy Weston that looked at some of the other contaminants, Jeff, before EPA signed off on the landfill. And there was nothing of any significant consequence there.
Right.
At the time.
At the time, right.
Yeah, that's right. It hasn't been one of the parameters that's been monitored on an ongoing basis, though. So.
I'm sure, that obviously the RFP for that or the scope of that would probably be, you bring it before the Board of Selectmen, and we still may be reviewing that, Jeff, as to the overall scope. But you capture certainly the vast majority of what we want to do, and we'll talk about maybe adding the other contaminants or not, and the practicality of doing that within this study.
Right. There's other monitoring programs going on, whether it's better to do under this work or under the other testing that's going on that's being done by other consultants at the landfill will be a question there as well.
Because if it's not coming from the landfill, then we've got a significant, it's possible we've got a significant other source, and it'd be nice to know where that's coming from.
You mean the dioxin?
Yes.
It's probably,
Mike, just one other thing. Looking at the charts, it was fascinating to me that all of the wells were generally in compliance until July 2005, when we put on the cap.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, the two downgradient wells, 2 and 5, shot up. And that's the time we moved the composting facility from the top of the landfill over to where it is today. Right. And the time we tampered with the remains of the septic lagoons.
Yes, right.
So, interesting story there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then adding on to that, Alan's right, that there's some really interesting data in this, and obviously I recommend it to everyone, but and that's correct, but also there were 1 or 2 wells, one in particular, that really showed significant nitrogen in the mid-90s. So that's some good data and some worthy of future analysis.
Bit of a puzzle and a forensic task as well. So
Is this information that everybody has seen? And it didn't come out through this group, so I'm wondering, should we just...
it's in the board package.
It's in the board package.
From
last week.
Yep.
From last week, the 8th, I believe.
So it just came out.
Yeah. The other priorities going forward, as I said, we're already thinking about FY16, again, presuming that the warrant article is approved. I've been putting together a Gantt chart work plan for how all of these tasks get done and how they integrate together in terms of decision process and timing. The other thing that's happening is that the board has asked me to put together a draft sort of straw man recommendation for how to organize these tasks going forward, whether to have monitoring under each of the separate tasks or one consolidated monitoring program, and how to procure and whether to procure and how to actually implement this program. There's quite a few different pieces to this, from traditional to non-traditional to monitoring to financial, and how that is structured in the program going forward is one of the things you have to look at. And I'm looking at that as we're doing the Gantt chart to say here's the timing of it and here's when things have to start. The priorities, of course, are certainly the landfill and the PRB, to get whatever testing we need to do, subsurface testing this summer. The disposal site for Tri-Town effluent is another top priority. We have a lot of preliminary information on that, but need to go further both in the technical side as well as the communication with DOT. And both of those have started, but that scope for the geohydro studies for the disposal site will be front and center come May, June timeframe. Let's see, what else? Oh, one of the things I wanted to talk about, and Stacy and I have been talking about this, and this was also in the board package and was sent out with the package for this meeting, is the public engagement for FY16. And in the package, there was a draft for consideration dated April 8th. It basically lays out the draft plan that the board, the board basically, I believe, is in agreement on this, but we wanted to talk through it to give you a framework for how we'll proceed next year. The thinking at this point, the goals to implement the 2016 warrant tasks in accordance with the principles and understandings of the consensus statement. So the intent here is to take the consensus statement, the specific elements in there, and now they get expanded into particular projects. As in accordance with the warrant articles, those projects have scopes, schedules, budgets, deliverables that basically form the work for 2016. Retain knowledge and perspectives of the Water Quality Advisory Panel for continuity, as Stacy mentioned before. Keep residents and businesses of Orleans informed and engaged as the plan is confirmed and developed. Maintain DEP and Cape Cod Commission involvement in FY16 planning tasks. Maintain Board of Selectmen leadership on the program. So those are the goals for public engagement for next year.
Maybe just add under 3, we say keep residents and businesses of Orleans, but in surrounding towns, or...
Good point.
I mean, I might even suggest clarifying in number 2, what we want to do is make sure that we are maintaining consistency with the underlying concerns and interests that you brought to this table in the first place. That as this all gets implemented and refined, that it retains attention to those things that you all care about and are committed to, so that we remain a united group attacking a problem together. Right? That's that frame.
Well said. Said by a consensus builder as opposed to an engineer.
What else would you expect?
In that light, the Board of Selectmen will continue the monthly board wastewater workshops, which I think have been productive and helpful in terms of bringing stuff together and summarizing them for understanding and decisions. Provide written monthly summaries of progress, milestones, and issues. So instead of being a more summary type of thing, it'll be more, I'm not talking about a 20-page document, I hope, but succinct, to the point summary, and provide, and the other thing for the board is to provide guidance and decisions as required going forward. The advisory committee, the steering committee, or this panel, would turn into an advisory committee comprised of current panel members, including DEP and the Commission. Meet quarterly to review progress, milestones, and key issues. Update monthly with the written program summary that goes to the board. Continue communications with member constituencies. In light of that, Stacy and I have been talking about continuing, and this is now for comment, continuing the website. The title will change a little, and there may be some other folders, but we'll continue to add information to the website as it's developed. and also continuing the mailing list from this group, so that as stuff is added to the website, it's communicated that it's there, here's the results of it, so that there's this joint understanding and communication that goes on between the monthly meetings.
Mike, going back to the Board of Selectmen, it's not clear to me where you have the declarative verbs, provide written monthly summary. Is that something that the intent would be that the Board of Selectmen would be providing this summary, and it would be perhaps posted again on the town website? Or it would be derived from the monthly meeting that was focused, and therefore something would come out of those meetings and be posted to the website, not necessarily making people rely on looking at the videotapes of the meetings?
Of the board meetings.
Of the board meetings?
That's a good question. That's sort of a second level.
The challenge right now is if you want to see what goes on at a selectmen's meeting, they're not all minuted in writing, and you have to go to the tapes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, certainly, which came first, the chicken or the egg? My anticipation is that the summaries will be written for the board.
Right.
Those summaries will be circulated around, and put on the website and circulated to this group. Now, at the board meeting itself, they may decide to change something or do something in addition or something less or whatever. So that needs to be, what you're saying is that needs to be reflected in some way before the next quarterly meeting, which...
Well, I think it would be reflected in your next monthly report.
Yeah, that's right. So at least...
So it'll be done in that phase.
There is a way to write code that takes you directly to an excerpt inside a videotape. So they could have a link inside on the website where you clicked it would take you to that spot on that. You don't have to watch the whole meeting. I'm just saying it would at least take you to that.
I know that.
Yeah.
I know that.
Yeah.
But I'm looking at the common, everyday, ordinary citizen as opposed to the uncommon of those of us here in this meeting who know how to cleverly do that.
There is a way to do it that they could click on.
Diplomatic way of putting it.
How many didn't know that?
Now you do.
That's good.
I do it all the time.
Like East Ham Selectmen's videos do have a little box you just click on if you want that subject. It's
Yeah,
really
that's
very
good.
simple.
Yeah, it is simple.
Good. Well, that's a good way to do it, too. But like Mr. McClellan and Mr. Dunphy said, it'll be in the next monthly report as well. So
That would be helpful.
So, just to be clear, the proposal is that the real locus of ongoing work and decision-making shifts more to the Board of Selectmen, with the technical working groups in Part 3, which we haven't talked about yet, doing the work part, but the decision-making and the discussion really happening at the Board of Selectmen meeting, with the Wastewater Advisory Committee still playing a check-in, communication, conduit role. I would maybe add to bullet number 2 under the Wastewater Advisory Committee, providing input and advice and feedback. So it's not a one-way just hearing what's going on, but again, it's the chance for the stakeholders to guide and make sure that everything's staying true to the principles and the values and the interests that underlie the consensus that the group has reached. Right.
Does this include liaisons or just stakeholders?
I think that what is intended here are the members. The liaisons, in most cases, will be involved in any case. The shellfish warden, different town departments, et cetera, they'll be involved in any case. We could continue them on the mailing list for sure. And I suppose I'll throw that out there. What about the liaisons for the monthly meetings? Would that be?
Not monthly, you mean quarterly.
Quarterly.
I think the quarterly meeting should be for this group that has spent the last...
Members and liaisons.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay,
and
that's fine.
it's an open meeting.
It's meant to be information sharing
We have them there
and
and
some
they may
advice
be
backwards.
information, so That's good. I hadn't differentiated there, but that's good.
And certainly I see the opportunity for liaisons to also be participating in the technical working groups.
Yes.
Yes.
That's right.
As well as potentially stakeholders.
Yeah.
Those dates will be sent out at some point.
Well in advance, I hope.
Yeah. I mean, to set the whole schedule up. Yeah.
It would be good to be able to do that, right?
Just on Roman numeral 3, when you broke it out on possible working groups, under shellfish/aquaculture, I would also add /waterways, because you're going to have navigational concerns or considerations with some of these. And under monitoring, maybe define it a little more, /water quality, /ecosystem health, I don't know. Something that gives it a little bit more clarification than just monitoring.
Okay.
Monitoring can be financial monitoring, it can be lots of different.
Yeah. Those are good comments. I want to spend some more time on Roman
Yeah, do you want to talk
3.
about Roman numeral 3? then?
Yeah, more detail. I just had a thought on number 2, but that's okay. Back to it. Sims?
I was just going to give you a second to sort through that. I mean, the last bullet at the bottom of 3, monitoring, is both embayments and sort of the pre and post structure monitoring too.
That's right. You mean
so when you have a PRB, you're going to have upstream and downstream.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
So that comes under the monitoring heading.
Exactly. I didn't.
It's a very broad category.
I didn't define these in more detail, but that's right. The monitoring, and let's move to number 3. And now this is have a number of discussions on this already, because Stacy and I have been talking about open meeting law, and what we don't want to do is get into having work groups that were bound by formality, logistics, all types of things that bog down. These are intended to be technical working groups, not informational public involvement. This is project specific. So, as with the aquaculture forum this morning, that's informational. That's we have a broader array of participants. But the next cut at that, when we get into a technical work group, will be people that really have expertise, responsibility, policy-making, decision-making responsibility in that particular area. So as Mr. McGrath said, that would more likely come from the liaisons in town than the members of the panel itself. And that's kind of what we're aiming at there. People that really want to invest time, that have something to add to the process, and engaged in the implementation of it as well. So the working groups will have, in general, will probably have, we haven't thought through this for all of them yet, but some sort of technical advisory, external technical advisors associated with it, like Shellfish, but also 1 or 2 or 3 people from the town who have particular expertise there that need to know what's going on and will be involved in the implementation, monitoring, and success of the program. It's always a balance between continuing separately over here and then telling people later what you did, or involving people along the way and having it grow to such a large number of people and broader interests and generalities that it undercuts the purpose of the group, which is to be specific, project specific. We have to reach a balance there, and it's probably going to mean not having as many people as are interested in it on the work groups, because this is really going to be a work group. The meetings will be called, basically working with the consultants on the project team. The meetings will be project-driven, not regular meetings. Subject-driven, so they'll be much more related to the development of the projects than policy or decisions in a broader sense. That's the goal. The goal is to be open and inclusive, but for the right purpose, not for general education. Is that clear? Is that I'm asking myself.
I think that's quite clear, Mike. It's well described.
Would they be open to the public to listen and observe?
You know, what the problem with that is then you get into videotaping or public, making them public, and it adds to the logistical. I would say not. We've had a number of meetings here over the last year, for instance, where George Meservey comes from a planning point of view, or other people here in this group have come to various meetings because they had specific input that was required for that meeting, technical. It's more from the external consultant's point of view, from their benefit, as opposed to the town's benefit, to be honest.
Right, and these are not going to be appointed people, appointed groups.
Not appointed. If there's specific interest, let me know, and we will sit down, talk, and get the right people engaged that really constructive, technically focused, project-specific mission.
I think the key point is they're not decision-making groups, right? They're expert advice and implementation and preparation of data and material and decision-making at the board level.
And the one thing is, recognition is, I was talking to a colleague that's working in another town yesterday, and he was surprised that we'd even invite any people from the town to these kinds of things. I said, well, you don't know Orleans. There's people around the table here that have invested, the last 25 years in the issues that we're going to be dealing with on these projects. Specific knowledge and expertise that we don't want to miss. And even more important, we don't want it coming in later on saying, why didn't you do it this way? Or that's not right because you should have looked at it this way. We really want to engage going along and really have the pain come in little bits as we work together going forward instead of at the end when it all comes in and you haven't communicated. So communication to me is the key here.
Yeah, and Stacy's comment is a good one. These groups aren't about policy making or policy changing or changing direction. This is about implementation, about making the things that have been decided to be done, making them happen and getting them done. So it's not making the rules, you're just implementing
That's right.
the policy.
Now, keep in mind, that's exactly right, but this is adaptive. We're going to get in and we're going to find that, gee, this didn't work the way we thought. This site doesn't work. This doesn't work. That doesn't work. So there's going to be an adaptive framework to this that it's actually the implementation, which is going to be the challenge and the opportunity to continually optimize this plan.
And, I think in that context, Mike and I were talking about maybe clarifying just sort of the protocol of what these groups are, so that it is clear at what point there's a change that's happening that needs to go back to the decision-making level. Where can they tinker to make those changes in implementation in ways that are obviously consistent with where we've been and what we've decided? And where does it get to a point where, let's just take, for example, the financial group. If they're taking forward the financial tasks that Mike outlined in the one-pager here, they're going to put together options of different, and they're going to examine the implications of those options, and they're going to, and they're not going to decide which option to pick, right? So there needs to be enough clarity about the room that these working groups have to implement what is already clear and decided, and even within a margin where, of course, not everything is going to go exactly as planned, but there's a clear place in which, okay, we're deviating or we've seen enough change, we need to bring this back. And the expectation was also that the work going on in those groups is going to feed back into the monthly updates to the board, so there is going to be that opportunity at any point for people to see what's going on and where this might be going in a direction people might want to have some input in.
So, to summarize, it sounds like what's going on under Roman numeral 3 is, if not specifically, at least in a general term, staff effort.
One of the things that we talked about that's really important in creating the monitoring plan for these demonstrations are success metrics that are explicit, so that we can look at the data and agree on what we're looking at. And this is something I run into a lot, that we'll get a report, and it will report a number on this, that, or the other thing. And one person will look at it and say, glass is half full, the other will look and say, glass is half empty. So I think it's going to be really critical, and that's part of what these working groups are going to do, is vet those interpretation standards, because it's important for people to say up front what is success look like.
So I may just not yet be clearly understanding or seeing how this whole thing is going to play out. If we're talking strictly about consultants and staff, I think that's one thing. If we're talking about some citizen involvement as well, but there's no appointment, then how are these groups going to get to be formed? And I think Orleans is a community that's very interested in transparency, and I do really appreciate the awkwardness that comes of having to have all these open meetings. But I think that there's going to be a lot of unhappiness if these groups get set up and they're seen to be not transparent, not open, but meeting behind closed doors. I just think that that's going to be the perception. There's going to be some problems with it. So it may be that I'm just not quite yet envisioning how this is going to happen, but I think you need to think this through clearly.
Yeah, that was an impetus for the one-page protocol, because I recognize, Stacy and I talking through this, we recognize this needs to be defined better. But we need to reach that balance that allows it to be productive and frankly, cost-effective. It's expensive.
Yeah, I've got the concerns where you don't have the fix.
And I think your question about, okay, so if people aren't appointed, how do they
How does
get
it
there
happen?
is a good question. I asked that same
You know?
question, and I don't know what kind of potential answers there are that might meet the overall interest here, right? Which is get the right people to help do the right work without creating a level of burden that undermines really.
Yeah, and maybe there won't be this huge interest, but if you end up with 6 people in town who are really interested in participating in this, but suddenly only 2 of them are working on this group, and now these meetings are not being videotaped, and there are no minutes, and they're not open to the public, I just think there's going to be a real problem.
Yeah. Interest, to me, now, interest isn't the issue. It's qualifications need to be there, need to be engaged. One option would be to say it'll be on an as-needed basis, like the consultant team met probably 20 times over the last year. Sometimes we invited a particular person who had a particular piece of information we absolutely needed. That person may not have come again to anything. It wasn't necessarily an appointed official position on a group, but it was as needed. I mean, that's a way to do it as well.
But then it's not a working group, right? Then it's something else.
It's a geomorphic.
In this one-pager, I see very much the structure that the town has now. You have an advisory committee, you have a policy-making board at the top of the tree, and you have a group of professionals under Roman numeral 3 that implement it. And when they hit a roadblock to the implementation, they go back to the advisory board, who comes back to the decision makers with suggestions on how to adapt the policy. We have the consensus agreement as a guiding document, and I see a very smooth path back and forth, up and down.
Yeah, I agree.
He may have addressed what I was going to say, but it would be to have an understanding that anyone who would serve on these would be working under the consensus agreement. I think some of the nervousness is that you could get someone on one of these technical groups who really has a different agenda. And I think that's a bit of the nervousness, and I think we want to assure that it would not become a roadblock, but it would become a way of implementing the consensus agreement.
Yeah, I think that was the intent of the goals up front. I think goal number 1. And as Stacy elaborated on it, that's a given, yeah.
Obviously, this is a very sensitive issue, but that's the reason I made the comment about implementation rather than policy making. And I mean, it's not about deciding what to do. It's doing the stuff that you've been told to do. So if you've got a different agenda, you're not on the same page, then you're trying to change the implementation. But you know, and I understand the sensitivity to the transparency in open meetings, but we've done, Mark Fiegel's been here, and Mark Fiegel happens to have an incredible depth of knowledge of statistics, which in this environmental monitoring and this evaluation is going to be extremely important to making sure that we get the right amount of data to be able to do what we want to do. And he's decided to phase out of this, and he's done it because it's been very clear the last 2 or 3 years, every time it's suggested he come forth to get involved in one of these things and use his statistical knowledge, people, ignore him. And I guess, if you want to ignore the people in the community who come with professional experience, who have been there, done that, and can add value and don't charge you $150 an hour to do it, then fine, go spend $150 and get somebody in who can, whatever.
Yeah.
So I think, if you want to pass up the opportunity to involve people in the community in implementation who have skills from professional experience, then you're missing out on people who want to volunteer to do something good for this community.
Yeah, I think overall, I look upon this as a great, I'll use this as a kind of a compromise as to the pluses and minuses on the different approach that you can organize yourself to get something done. And I think Sim's highlighted it very well, summarized it very well. It's a process that makes, I think, an awful lot of sense. And it is I think, recognizing the realities of the situation, the timeline, the people involved. And I think, I feel confident in this. Honestly, because I think Michael, you know the people. We know the people. We can get the right people sitting at the right table, because a lot of people here, all reflecting, we care a lot. And I really feel good that this can be implemented effectively. There are always going to be people out there that will complain about one thing or another, and transparency is always easy to complain about. But I really feel confident that this can do it and get it done.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think that you all are familiar with Venn diagrams. 2 circles. You have someone who lives in this circle over here with experience and interest, and someone lives over here in this circle with experience and interest. Sometimes there's no overlap, and we want to prevent that. We don't want a process that we have to get through. There's an urgency. We're spending a lot of money. There's a lot of time invested. It has to be productive. We don't want extraneous things coming in. But a lot of times those circles overlap, and there's a certain amount of that expertise that is absolutely critical to the success of the overall project. Sometimes they overlap 90%. Sometimes they overlap 10%. That's almost on an individual basis, and has to be it's very hard to exclude it or to include it all the time. It needs to be done really sensitively on a case-by-case basis depending upon the particular questions and the particular issues. So I think it's a balance, as Mr. Dunford's saying, between perfection and practicality. And I think what we're trying to do here with the good suggestions that have been made in the one-page protocol is reach a practical, theoretically appropriate compromise. And I think that way you pointed it out actually is the umbrella. You have, 3 tiers of development of the program that each support one another, and I think it will work.
Well, and it's the process that the town operates now under with our advisory committees. But let's keep in mind also that there are a variety of resources, and they don't all have to be internal to the community. We have the commission, which has been adding to their various technical expertise. They have an environmental economist on staff now. I would expect that as these efforts go forward, that there will be specifically a statistician on board as part of their efforts to gather, warehouse, synthesize, and analyze the data that is collected across the Cape.
That's a good point. Yep.
So one thought I have is, it might be more clear if we don't, the way we're talking about it, perhaps technical working group is the wrong title, because it does imply more of a fixed membership or participation, and that seems like maybe that's not what we're talking about. Maybe what we're talking about is really task-oriented, implementation that's overseen by, the project manager in this case, and draws on the knowledge and expertise that they need on a case-by-case basis through the process in a way that maximizes the knowledge that exists, right? And if you think about it maybe in that way, rather than in terms of a fixed entity group, you kind of get around some of these logistic challenges. And again, with the one-pager, if you think about it as it's sort of it is the marching orders for that task, that implementation task. This is what needs to be accomplished, right? And you think about it really more in that frame. And you bring in, there's some discretion to the project team to bring in the expertise they need at the right times, but it's all going to get reported up to the board and to the advisory group. Does that seem like a more manageable way to think about it?
I like that.
So instead of work group, to say technical advisors.
Technical, yeah.
Implementation.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you think about it as just sort of task statements, right? That you really are implementing task statements and drawing on resources to do those.
So number 3 is sort of implementation resources.
Yeah.
Instead of a working group.
Yeah.
Doesn't specify who implements.
Yeah.
As a liaison only, but I think the other thing that's very important about the implementation group.
Could you speak up just a little bit?
I think another thing that's very important about the implementation group is the commitment. So I can't come in just because you're going to be discussing my favorite subject that I want to influence. So just like we all made a commitment to be here every time, I think that the people in an implementation task force are making a commitment for a said, this is what our outline of what we're doing, and are you here for this body of work?
I think I hear something a little bit in between. I think Stacy is talking almost like an ad hoc group that pulls in and out as necessary. I think you're inferring more of a commitment to everything. I see something in between that it actually has the combination of both. You need to be available when needed, I would say, on one end. And on the other end, there needs to be a recognition of when that resource should be called in and engaged in the process. I think there needs to be enough continuity, though, in that, so that it's not just, as Duke University is experiencing these days, that players come in for 1 year and then they go to the pros. We don't want that.
Oh, there's a shot. What do they call it? What about Kentucky?
Kentucky, too. I think they all do it now.
Kentucky more so than Duke.
Mike, I think earlier we spent about a half an hour, 30 minutes with Sia on shellfish aquaculture. And Sia was driving the train, and she's the person that's gone out on an ad hoc basis and talked to all these potential participants.
Yeah.
And sorted it out and come back to us and said, hey, look, this is the way we're going to do phase one of understanding aquaculture.
Yeah.
And you could use that same technique with PRBs and floating constructors. We will. You know, you're not going to create a committee. You're going to have somebody that you hire to go out and find out about these, and they're going to reach out, and they may find some people in Orleans that are extremely helpful, and they may find some people in the Chesapeake Bay.
Yeah.
So
I think that's right. Under that framework, this is workable with the changes that have been suggested.
We're just doing some wordsmithing. I mean, we set up this group because of water quality. I mean, should we retitle this Orleans Water Quality Planning, and number 2 should be Water Quality Advisory Committee? Because it's not just wastewater.
That's a good comment.
Very good point.
Bingo.
It's also a positive star.
Yeah, wastewater.
I mean, even to take number 2, it sounds like we really are thinking we're sticking with this panel, right? We can really just have it be this panel continuing
Well, there's certainly the people engaged here
and stay with the, yeah.
on a quarterly basis, getting together
Exactly.
and exchanging this information, reviewing what's going on.
Once a year, I'll come up with something.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike.
The band will play on.
So our last order of business, before we close, and before we move on to public comment and then close, is we want to talk a little bit about the product that comes out of this. Just wanted to clarify, initially, Marky's going to help me with this, I think there might have been a thought of having some big final report, and I think the thinking now is, boy, we've done a lot of work and it's been documented. We've got really good documentation of all the work that we've done, and to spend a lot of money paying someone to rewrite it didn't seem like it made a lot of sense. So that I think the outcome, the only new written outcome was going to be a short kind of summary that made sure to refer to all the things that we've already done and built and created, and maintain the knowledge for carrying this forward. Is that accurate?
Yes, yeah. The question, a lot of the work that Stantec did, as we talked about, was to take existing information and move it forward, putting in stuff on non-traditionals and things like that. So we have a consensus statement, we have a plan, we have warrant articles for next year, and rather than spend the time and energy in a number of technical memos and final report at this point, the warrant article for next year is one of the key line items, is a amended CWMP. Recognizing that there's still critical issues that need to be addressed over this year, like a site for disposal, like the landfill issue, a variety of different things that need to be addressed. So rather than basically spend that money and time now, let's take the technical information we have, incorporate it, which we have, incorporate it into the work for next year, key portions of it, and then at this time next year, we'll be prepared to produce that document as a result of this effort. That's the plan and proposal at this stage.
Any questions or comments on that?
Jim?
Yes, Jim. He's hiding behind Gordon.
I know.
can't see him very well. Sorry, Jim.
I assume this is the case, but you did a lot of work behind the scenes in terms of financial models, and then we dove into those and then we backed away. I would be a little bit more comfortable if you just verified that all of that raw material that you did is in a cohesive form, so you know, I'm tidy up. I agree. I doubt that any of us want to read a 1,000-page document. But I think it would be very valuable to make sure that that material is consolidated and available in a form that Joshua could use as he moves forward.
Yeah, I've got a copy. Well, I have an Excel copy of this. It's not just the financial model, it's a lot of material. We are, we will get that information from Stantec. We will, if it's not already, we'll categorize it, document it, pull the key pieces out we need to use for next year. It's more of a working database than anything. The financial model, one of the reasons we doubled back on the financial is because, you know, we want to show the transparency and provide information, but also we can't go too far because we don't have the final numbers anywhere near it yet. So that's a balance that we didn't want to go too far, but we wanted to provide enough to show people that what the key issues are going forward. So that's where it stands.
But to Jim's point, each aspect of this endeavor forms the starting point for the next portion of the endeavor. So it has to be accessible for the next team that comes in, pursuing whichever element they're going to be pursuing.
That's right. And that's the purpose. We'll have it categorized, you know, the information that was actually the final information that we used, basically ready to go.
Yes.
Just to go back for a moment to the conversation about local expertise and the task-specific implementation teams. I'll use a metaphor that's not related to my own consulting experience, but there's a reason why physicians don't practice on their own families. And I would strongly recommend that this group bite the bullet and hire the external expertise and make sure that the local expertise that we have is involved in what Mike was talking about, the intermediate interactions, and not some over-the-top blow it out of the water. But we really do need some arm's length consideration of the issues. So I would vote for spending the money.
Or using the commission and their resources.
It's always better using other people's money.
Because we've already spent the money on that.
Okay. So I think that leaves us with a statement of appreciation. I personally would love to tell you all how much I have appreciated getting to be part of this. And this is, if you had asked me at the beginning what my dream was for this group, people think because I'm a consensus builder, my dream is that we reach consensus. And, well, yeah, that's great that we reach consensus, but my real dream is the shift in how we're working with each other. To moving from this feeling of we need to fight against each other to achieve what we need, and moving instead to a we are united in a goal. We all have our own take, our own priorities maybe within that, but we are united in a goal on a problem and coming up with a solution that we all can live with for that problem. And seeing that shift happen over time, you guys built that. You built that with your commitment by coming to these long meetings over and over and demonstrating your seriousness to each other and your respectfulness towards each other. And so I'm really in awe of all of what you all have accomplished. So.
I can say we appreciate, obviously, your not small contribution, your very large contribution to the success that you just enumerated. I think we can all be very pleased with how this has turned out, and thank you for all that you've done to help us get to where we needed to get. So, please, a nice round of applause. Thanks, Stacy.
I
think we should also give you a lifetime round-trip ticket from Arlington to New Orleans, because I suspect we may ask you to come back occasionally.
A beach.
Oh, we'll give you
We'll make you an honorary resident.
But you better not ask for a mooring.
Yeah, right.
Don't ask for a mooring.
Don't ask to go out on the beach.
So am I right then to say we're not really necessarily dismissing the panel, because the panel will reconvene quarterly, play its role to make sure that communication and teamwork prevails as the implementation goes forward? Are there any other public comments?
Not to detract from all the positives, and sincere thanks. When we did that first visioning exercise that you had us do, write the comments down, yours was, "We'll get here." So thanks again. I have just two things to say, and one is to kind of build off of what Jeff said in terms of a contributor who is not at the table today, but I do think in terms of getting to the evaluation, monitoring, verification portion of all the demos, you really want to follow the development of a methodology first. We had said that, and Mark Fiegel had also supported it. I've worked in that arena on energy-type data, and that really needs to be done. So then what you are collecting is useful to then verify. So two-step process. The other issue I raised a couple of meetings ago, and it's just a reminder for getting into the technical implementation, is specific to the watershed boundary data sets. I do think that we need to revisit them, modify them, and confirm them. Specifically in the meeting house, I call it the pink, or the colors change as you go to different printing shops, but specifically in that watershed, since the original CWMP was assembled, it was based on the, I believe it's 2006 MEP report. So it's a little dated. We've had some changes in terms of property boundaries, land contours through development, site-specific nitrogen loading may have in fact changed. So I think the issue goes directly to the financial model. So when we really look at the rate groups and the buckets that we decide that we're going to be allocating costs to, those customers need to be carefully considered, because the uniqueness about Meeting House is it has a 100% nitrogen removal goal. And my concern, as I've said many times, is the rate burden being put on different classes of customers, particularly those that can't afford it. And we really need to make sure that the sole burden of cleaning this up is not on a small group of customers. So, thanks.
Any other final public comment?
Seeing none, then I guess a move to adjourn.
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.